Hey, what's going on, boys? It's 2. The Tingyun banner should be out by now, but if you're watching this video, it means that you care more about that 4-star fox girl on Raid Up with him right now, and thus makes you one of the most cultured individuals in the world. And what exactly gives me the authority to say that? Well, as you can see on the screen now, I play quite a few gacha games, and in those gacha games, if they give me the option to acquire a waifu with foxtails, you damn well know I'm about to take it. Why yes, I do in fact fluff foxtails on a daily basis. How could you tell? In addition to my very obvious addiction to fox girls, I've been using her as part of my main team in Star Rail ever since release basically, so I know a thing or two about how she works. And so I'm here to give you a guide on how to play Tingyun in Honkai Star Rail. Tingyun is a 4-star Lightning Harmony character. The main job of Harmony characters in this game is to give offensive buffs to their teammates, but each of them also have something in their kits that only they bring to the table that the others don't have, as a way to differentiate themselves from each other. The TLDR of this video is this: Tingyun is a fantastic buffer who specializes in supporting one DPS character on her team, and her unique perk is the ability to feed ult energy directly to whoever she targets. She's very fast but very squishy, and she's got one of the most expensive ults in the game because of how good it is, which means she's best used in hypercarry teams that focus on just one DPS character and buff them to the moon for maximum effectiveness. Let's take a look at her stats first. At level 70, Tingyun has a base HP of 743. This is very low, the lowest among the 3 Harmony characters we have in the game right now, and even with Lycon's stats, expect your Tingyun to be the squishiest character on your team, because she sure as hell was for me. This means that you need to babysit her quite a bit with your healer to make sure she's topped off with health, because 1 or 2 bad hits and she'll already almost be dead. Her own attack isn't anything to write home about either at 464 at level 70 on its own. Tingyun is supposed to be a damage support, not a DPS herself obviously, so her own attack value outside of, scaling for her own buffs shouldn't normally matter in terms of her own damage, but we'll come back to this later as we talk about the rest of her kit. Her speed, on the other hand, is definitely something to write home about. With a base speed of 112, she's one of the fastest characters in the game. This is critical for Tingyun because you want her to move first so that she can open the fight by using her skill on your DPS, and that way your DPS character can start their turn doing more damage right away. Speaking of her skill, let's move on to talking about her kit. Her skill itself is called Soothing Melody, which grants the benediction status to one ally for 3 turns, and it's only active on whoever Tingyun last used her skill on. So for example, she can't use the skill on multiple allies to give them all benediction. It doesn't work like that. It increases the attack of the ally it's used on by 25 to 62.5% from level 1 to 15, but only up to 15 to 30% of Tingyun's own attack. And when the ally with benediction attacks, they'll deal additional lightning damage equal to 20 to 50% of their own attack for one time only. Now, keep in mind that the attack buff value that the ally with benediction gets cannot exceed the corresponding value of Tingyun's own attack. This makes Tingyun's own attack value the bottleneck, or in other words, you want Tingyun's own attack stat to be as high as possible so that the benediction buff that she gives can be as high of a buff to your DPS as possible as well. Perhaps the more interesting effect here is the additional lightning damage that an ally with benediction does. The game is admittedly a little vague about this, so I did some testing to see what exactly is going on, and this is what I found. Benediction adds 1 more hit to any attack that the ally with the status does, basic, skill, or ult. That damage is considered lightning damage. It scales off of that ally's own attack, not Tingyun's, and it can crit. And as long as benediction is still active, and you can tell if it still is down to the bottom of the screen on Tingyun's profile as indicated by the 3 dots, your ally with benediction will continue dealing this additional instance of lightning damage with any attack that they use. However, this extra lightning damage cannot reduce toughness on an enemy with lightning weakness, so don't go thinking that this means your DPS can all of a sudden break enemies with it when they're not lightning themselves. Besides, that's kind of someone else's job soon. Tingyun's ult, amidst the rejoicing clouds, is why you play this character. It increases one ally's damage by 20 to 65% for 2 turns from levels 1 to 15, and unique to Tingyun, it also directly charges their ult with 50 energy immediately. This battery effect is, needless to say, godlike. It's most useful on DPSs who take longer to charge their ults like Yanqing, but it's still incredibly useful for any DPS anyway, since they can spam their ults even faster with Tingyun supporting them. And remember that she can still use this ult on non-DPS teammates too if the situation calls for it. For example, if your team needs healing right away, and your healer is close to their ult but their turn is after an enemy's, Tingyun can use her ult on your healer instead to have them get their ult and use it immediately. Sure, you'll probably waste a damage buff on them, but that's better than losing a character outright at least. If Star Rail didn't let you use ults whenever you want, Tingyun's ult would still be good, but not great, so the fact that you can is honestly what makes Tingyun's ult so versatile. And this ult specifically increases an ally's damage, which is a different buff type than the attack buff on her skill, and thus will stack better with it, and so it's extremely potent on top of that. It does have one major downside though, and that's the fact that it costs 130 energy, making it one of the more expensive ults in the game. Her talent, Violet Sparknado, is basically the extra lightning damage effect that Benediction gives to an ally just for herself. Whenever Tingyun herself attacks an enemy, she'll deal an additional hit of lightning damage that scales from 30 to 75% attack of the ally who has Benediction. And her technique, Gentle Breeze, is just as unique as her ult. Each time she uses it, Tingyun immediately gains 50 energy towards her next ult. And yes, she can use it more than once in a row, meaning she can go from no energy to full ult with 3 technique points. Most techniques in the game cannot be used repeatedly like this in one go before a fight, making Tingyun's one of the only ones that can, and it partially addresses Tingyun's expensive ult cost by at least letting her start a fight with it, again assuming you have the tech points to do so. Ideally, you should level both her ultimate and her skill together, with a slight emphasis on her ultimate since the damage buff on it will scale better, followed by her talent and then basic attack. And for her bonus abilities, unlock Nourish Joviality first, which gives her 20% extra speed for one turn after she uses her skill, then Jubilant Passage, which gives her 5 free energy at the start of each of her turns, and then Nell Subdual last, since it only buffs her basic attack. Alright, now that we know what she does, let's put together her game plan, what you need her to do in a fight, and it starts even before you get into one. Because Tingyun's technique lets her charge her ult just before your team engages an enemy, she can start the fight with her ult fully charged or near fully charged, which can kickstart your DPS's damage output right from the beginning. And just repeating here, but make sure your Tingyun is faster than your DPS so that she can use her skill on them first, so that way they can attack with Benediction on their very first turn. The Benediction status on Tingyun's skill lasts for 3 turns, and just for the record here, 3 turn buffs are actually quite rare in Star Rail, and it specifically can't be put on multiple allies, so this means Tingyun has the opportunity to get some basic attacks in after casting her skill. This is why her talent gives her extra damage that scales off the attack of the ally she gives her skill to, and the reason why her second bonus ability increases her basic attack by 40%. In fact, remember when I was talking about her attack stat earlier in the video? Because Tingyun only scales off of attack, you're likely going to give her a lot of attack stats, and so her own attack stat should actually be pretty high. And when you combine this with her talent and second bonus ability, suddenly she starts slapping people with her fan a lot harder than you might expect. Shiranui Mai called, she wants her fans back. Obviously, she's not gonna suddenly replace your DPS anytime soon, but hey, if she's gonna smack some bitches anyway, might as well let her smack him as hard as she can, right? Because of this, Tingyun isn't as much of a, dare I say, skill point whore as Bronya is, for example, because she'll actually get to use her basic attack on a regular basis. So, you want to use her basic attacks to either help weaken or just straight up take out side mobs, or to help break a boss enemy. Tingyun won't be breaking a boss's toughness meter anytime soon by herself anyway, but there are times when her basic attacks do add up to help break a boss just in time to stop them from using a big attack or something. However, because Tingyun's ult can be so pivotal, there can be times when you want to recast her skill even if Benediction isn't done yet, because using skills in Star Rail generates more energy than basic attacks, and this is especially relevant if your Tingyun doesn't have any extra energy regen stats like an an ER link rope. And again, reminder that you can and should use Tingyun's ult on teammates other than your DPS if the situation calls for it. And since you can use ults at any time, including in between enemy actions, keep an eye on your team's ults at all times, because if Tingyun gets her ult from getting hit by enemies, she can immediately use it to charge either your healers or DPS's ults to full and potentially save your team if you're in a tight spot. In other words, energy management is very important for Tingyun and definitely something to consider when gearing her out. And lastly, also keep an eye on her HP. She's likely going to be the squishiest character on your team, so make sure her health never dips down too low. Put Tingyun on either the leftmost or rightmost positions when setting up your team, ideally. This is because a lot of enemy AoE attacks don't hit everyone on your team, only the one it targets and the characters adjacent to them, or what I like to call splash damage. So Tingyun can avoid getting hit if she gets lucky with enemy targeting, or if you bring a taunter who sits on the other side from her to draw aggro. Let's move on to her gear, starting with light cones. Technically speaking, the battle isn't over. Bronya's light cone is also Tingyun's best in slot. The 30% extra damage buff for the ally after her is perfect for her, since Tingyun only buffs one ally at a time anyway, and it gives Tingyun 1000 more HP at level 70, which makes her noticeably tankier than if she had a different light cone. The biggest issue I have with giving Tingyun the battle isn't over though is the damage buff. Because it applies to the next ally after her, you have to make sure that the DPS she's supporting specifically goes after her, which means you need to have both Tingyun and her DPS have the right speed stats to make it happen, which means they gotta have the right relic stats. And even then, your team's turn order might vary throughout a fight anyway because of potential speed buffs or debuffs that either Tingyun or her DPS can get. And if you have Bronya, you should really be using this light cone on her instead for obvious reasons. My personal pick is Dance Dance Dance, which pushes your entire team's actions forward by 16% at S1 when Tingyun uses her ult, and it'll oftentimes be enough to push some of your characters' turns ahead of some enemies and have them act first when they weren't supposed to, which gives Tingyun's ult an extra layer of potential utility. Some other light cones that she can use are Carve the Moon, her light cone for the Battle Pass, Memories of the Past, and even Meshing Cogs and Chorus, which are 3-star light cones. Carve the Moon is kinda like the Witsith from Genshin, where its ability is RNG between 3 effects. 2 of them are useful, the attack and energy regen, but one of them, the crit damage, is only useful for your DPS and not Tingyun herself, though that's not too bad anyway. Memories of the Past and Meshing Cogs both help Tingyun's energy gain, and Chorus gives a permanent team attack buff, so exactly lines up what Tingyun wants to do anyway. Past and Future is basically battle isn't over, except without the first 2 effects, so yeah, definitely not ideal. Planetary Rendezvous only increases the damage of teammates who are the same element as a user, so it's good if you're running Tingyun with an Electro DPS like Tingyun, and basically useless if you're not. And now for everyone's favorite, Relics. 4-piece Musketeer is by far her best relic set. It gives her 12% extra attack and increases both her speed by 6% and her basic attack damage by 10%. These are all relevant effects for Tingyun, but the most important effect here is actually the speed increase, because it helps ensure that Tingyun is faster than your DPS and thus can start them off with her benediction buff like we mentioned earlier. Do not use the 4-piece lightning set on her. The 4-piece effect's 20% attack buff after using a skill apparently does not increase her benediction buff, which makes the 4-piece effect useless on her. If you don't have enough relics to put a full 4-piece Musketeer set together, you can just mix and match 2-piece Musketeer, Thief, and Lightning sets. For her ornaments, her best 2-piece set is Space Sealing Station, since it increases her attack by 12% and doubles it if her speed is 120 or higher, and Tingyun has an easier time hitting 120 speed than others. She can also use Sprightly Von Walk for the extra energy gain, if I'm even pronouncing that right, which I'm probably not, and Fleet of the Ageless, because not only will she get 12% extra health, which she really likes, but also further increase the team's attack by 8% if her speed is 120 or higher. For individual relic stats, her default stat should be, you guessed it, attack percent. Attack percent boots, attack percent body piece, attack percent planar, and, of course, attack percent link rope. Because Tingyun has such high base speed already, plus you want her to be using 4-piece Musketeer, she really doesn't need speed boots unless you want your Tingyun to go like, I don't know, twice in a row or something, which is cool until you realize that her own attack is the lower limit for her benediction buff, so she really needs that extra attack. But also consider running an energy link rope instead, because again, Tingyun has one of the more expensive ults in the game, and you may find her default energy gain to be pretty slow, even with her technique. For substats, look for at least 1 or 2 speed rolls. 4-piece Musketeer's speed buff should take her speed up to around 118 or 119, so 1 speed substat should qualify her for her relic set effects that need her to be at 120 speed. Preferably, you also want her to be over 120, so that way she's faster than the enemies who have base 120 speed themselves, and thus can move first before them. Otherwise, look for attack percent, naturally, followed by effect resistance, since it's very important for your supports to be able to resist immobilizing debuffs like Imprison, Freeze, or Kafka's Domination, and any extra chance they get to resist them will help. And then break effect to help Tingyun finish off side mobs better. And finally, her Eidolon levels. She's already very solid at E0, so I don't consider any of her Eidolons to be critical for her, and if you come from Genshin Impact, that might come as a surprise to you given how dependent most of the 4 stars in that game are on their constellations. That being said, all of her Eidolons are still quite nice to have. Her E1 gives your DPS 20% extra speed for 1 turn, her E2 regens 5 extra energy for your DPS when they kill an enemy with Benediction, though this can only happen once per turn, since this would be absolutely broken on Selly. Her E4 specifically increases the extra lightning damage that your DPS does with Benediction by 20%, and her E6 adds another 10 energy to her ult's energy transfer to bring it up to 60 energy total that she's feeding to a teammate, which for a lot of the characters in this game, at that point, that's half their total ult cost. In summary, Tingyun is a great damage buffer who brings an attack buff, damage buff, and, unique to her, instant energy charge that she can feed directly to a teammate to immediately charge their ult with. She can't support multiple DPSs though, due to the single target nature of both her skill and ult, which means she's much more suited to hypercarry teams like the one you've seen me use throughout this video, because that way she can focus her entire kit onto one character as her skill and ult were intended. And while her Benediction buff is still active, she can help clear adds or chip away at boss shields to make it easier for your DPS to then break them. Keep an eye on her HP and her ult meter so that way you can abuse instant ults when you see a chance to do so, and that's how you play Tingyun in Honkai Star Rail. Also, big shoutouts to anime fox girls with huge tits, gotta be one of my favorite genders, for real for real. If you found the video informative, useful, or just downright degenerate because of my debilitating love for anime fox girls, please subscribe to the channel for future Star Rail videos, and make sure to check me out over at my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/ToaSniper98. I stream every day starting at anywhere between noon to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard, and I usually go for at least 4 to 6 hours, so stop by if you have any further questions about Tingyun, or Star Rail, or just gachas in general, since in case you haven't noticed by now, I'm a bit of a gacha master myself. Next video will be a guide on Bronya, my actual favorite character in Star Rail. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you over at Twitch. Peace!